going to start off this shoulder stretch sequence, guys, with the banded lat stretch. This is one of my favorites. We're going to step back so we got nice tension in the band, nice neutral spine. We're going to let the band pull our arm forward. As you can see, I'm stretching my right arm in this one, so I'll shift my hips over to the left. That gives me a nice deep stretch down that lat. In the event I don't want to move my hips over, I can also step the right leg back behind. You can just switch sides for this to make it work on the left side as well. Personally, what I like to do though, stretch the right arm up, I'll move my hips over to the left. If you're having trouble keeping that palm up, you can see where I take my hand, place it on top of my right hand to keep that thumb up. Now here you'll see where I have a bent elbow. Don't let that elbow bend. Let the band pull you. Don't pull the band itself. From here, we're going to move into a banded chest and shoulder stretch. You'll see I'm just secured into the band, stepping forward with a lot of tension, getting a nice stretch throughout my chest and shoulder right here. Now, the big key to this one also, guys, is not to bend the elbow. You'll see how it loses tension and a lot of pressure and stretch that we're getting throughout that shoulder and our chest. You see here with this bent elbow, we want to stay away from that. You want to have fully extended, turning away from the band as much as possible to get a nice deep stretch. The next stretch in this sequence is the banded shoulder stretch. This one's fairly the easiest in the sequence. We're going to secure ourselves into the band, locking our arm out overhead, stepping in, a lot of tension in the band, pulling our arm back behind us, getting a nice deep stretch throughout the tricep and shoulder. The final stretch in this sequence is going to work on our tricep and lat a little more. We're going to secure ourselves into the band at our elbow. We're going to step in, allowing the band to pull us back again, keeping the elbow close to the head. As you'll see right here, this is what it looks like when the elbow is away from the head. You don't quite get the stretch on it. Make sure the elbow is secured close to the head, straight up and down, to get a nice deep stretch down that tricep. Now we're going to move into stretching out our wrist. We call this one the clock stretch because your hand placement can be at 12, 3, 9, and 6 o'clock. The keys to this, guys, is constant pressure and tension throughout the shoulder and elbow. I'm constantly pressing into this. I like to do it on an elevated position so I have some leverage. We can do this more dynamic and static. As you'll notice, there's times I'm doing some elbow rotations, but I'm keeping my arms fully locked and extended. I'm moving back and forth, but this gives a lot more play into our wrist. Now, once I am done fully stretching out in different positions, I will turn my hands over, as you'll see right here. And in this position, what we're going to do now is we're going to roll around. This is why I also like to do it on a softer surface, because this is a lot of pressure on the wrist, but we can get some muscle symmetry here and stretch out both sides of our wrist. Now we're going to stretch the lower portion of our body. I like to start with this on our pigeon pose. And this is a great yoga pose. We're going to make sure to start with a vertical shin to our body, hands on the ground, and you can also lean further over if you need to. This is a great stretch for guys for stretching out that piriformis, which is your buttocks. It allows for more mobility, it allows us to get further and deeper into a squat, and it also opens up the hips. You'll see here I'm trying to minimize the space between the ground and my hips. This is the overall goal that I like to try to achieve when I'm working on this pigeon pose, to get that space between the ground and my hips as minimal as possible and get a nice deep stretch before we move into some activation. Now this is one of everybody's favorite stretches. You'll see this almost any gym that you visit. This is the couch stretch. We're going to start with securing our leg onto a surface, the lead leg that's not being stretched. I like to start with a vertical shin. This is a really good stretch, guys, for stretching out that quad, hip flexors, and the hip as well. Once we are in this position, we can simply start to squeeze our buttocks together, pushing our hips forward to get a nice deeper stretch into this motion. This is one of the favorites before any type of squat motion I use. I highly recommend this for loosening up those quads, hip flexors, and hip. Now there are some people that struggle getting in this position due to balance. One thing I like to have them do is use a PVC pipe for assistance. This will help secure them in that upright position so they can still work on loosening up before going into activation. The calf stretch, we're going to start by placing our heel as close as we can to the rig. Now from here, we're going to keep our knee nice and straight. We're going to secure onto the rig, leaning into it. This is going to allow for a nice deep stretch throughout our calf, making sure that the leg is kept fully extended at all times. We're not going to bend our knee for this particular stretch. Lean into the pole. You can do this static or dynamically, whatever's best for you. This is going to give you a nice deep stretch throughout that calf. Now that we've stretched out our calves, we're going to move on to our Achilles. The same setup is applied for this, heel close to the rig. Only this time we're going to bend our knee. From here, we can grab onto the anchor of the rig and try to pull our knee closer to the rig, or we can also put our weight onto the front of our knee, pushing our knee close to the rig. With this, you're going to feel a nice deep stretch throughout that Achilles, giving you more ankle flexion. Now we're going to move into the banded portion of this sequence for our ankles. We're going to get a lot of tension into the band. We're going to place the band at the top of the foot, right where the ankle tends to meet. From here, we're going to keep our foot flat on the floor. We can put weight onto our knee. We're going to drive that knee forward, getting as much flexion into that ankle as we can. I'm going to move my foot out here so that you can see the arch of my foot. You should maintain the arch of the foot just like you were if you were squatting in this portion. Don't allow this to collapse in where your feet becomes flat. This will enable bad habits later on in squatting, so make sure that we maintain that arch throughout this stretch. Band pull aparts is one of my favorite primer exercises ever. It's a great way to get the subscap ready for some activation and training each day. Now, a couple key elements to this. You want to keep constant tension in the band. You don't want to see any slack whatsoever. We're going to keep the elbows nice and straight. As we pull back, we're trying to pull our shoulder blades back and down, as you'll see right here. And the elbows are still locked in the rear position. My shoulder blades are moving together and down, locking in position the same way they would be if I was pressing weight overhead, pressing weight from my back. Now, a couple bad reps, you guys can see, slack in the band, jerking. This right here just looks silly, and I don't want you guys to do this motion or use bent elbows. The pass-through is a great exercise for getting some rotation in the shoulders and activated for weightlifting. Now, when we're doing this, you don't have to go all the way back to touch a small of your back. Just go back as far as you can. But the key element to this is constantly be pushing on the bar, or you can do these with a green or red band and just make sure you're pressing out. But if you notice, if I'm using any of the bands or the PVC pipe, that my elbows are staying locked. I'm not bending my elbows throughout this movement or throughout this rotation. This would be a great activation, guys, for getting those shoulders ready for some training. We're going to do some Spanish squats here. We're going to secure a band to the rig, and then we're going to put one leg in on time, just as we were putting on some pants. Now, this is a great exercise if you're an athlete that is having a very vertical shin on squats. This is going to help pull you forward. So once we get secured in, we're going to take a step back. The band's around the back of the knee. As you'll notice, I squat, the band is pulling my knees forward, and we're going to do a few reps of these. Sometimes we'll do them with a pause, but this pulling forward is going to give me more dorsal flexion in the ankles, and it's driving those knees forward, allowing to open up the hips to get deeper into a squat. It's a great primer exercise that I always recommend, especially for those athletes that are squatting with a very vertical shin. Now we're going to do some goblet squats. I like to use these for dual purpose. The first one, of course, is to just work on a squat with a very upright chest and motion. As we drop, notice how I'm dropping my elbows in between my legs, not on the outside, not on top, but they're in between. The reason for this also is I like to sometimes stretch out my hips, thighs, and hip flexors with the goblet squats. So it's the same motion. Just as I drop, I'm going to place my elbows on the inside and drive my knees out. Notice how my feet don't move. This is going to create a lot of torque and tension in the hips. It should be the same type of tension you feel if you're doing a heavy back squat. So this is a good way to get athletes a feel for that nice tension in the hips. Banded good mornings is a phenomenal exercise. We're just going to start with securing the band with our feet and around our neck. We're going to start with a soft bend to the knee, and all we're going to do is simply hinge our hips back, continuously pressing our hips back, keeping a nice neutral spine. You should feel a lot of tension in the glutes and the hamstrings on this, guys. So the only thing happening here is my hips continue to push back, using my feet to drive into the ground, drive my hips back, a nice neutral spine. Now, there's a few bad reps I'll show here. I don't want to see a low squat, completely bending over. We're going to lose all the tension that we're trying to build in those hamstrings and glutes for activation. Soft bend of the knee, keeping a nice hinge back, fully leaning over if possible. Some days going to be tighter than others, some days you're not. Just be sure that we don't collapse in the middle. Nice, tight hamstrings, nice glutes, pressing back. Get a lot of tension in that before moving into the activation. The reverse lunge. You see a lot of people doing normal lunges, but you don't see too many reverse lunges in a primer warm-up. I like to use the reverse lunge because it really helps me activate that posterior chain engagement, especially on those squatting days where I need to drive with my legs. All we're simply going to do is take a step back, drop the knee to the ground. Don't take too far of a step back so that you become off balance. I want you to stay balanced here. Scap Hangs. Besides the band pull aparts, this is one of my favorite activation exercises. We're simply hanging from a bar. We're pulling up on the bar while pushing away and rotating my elbows in. This will allow my subscap, those back shoulder blades, to travel back and down into place, the same place I like to have them when I'm moving weight out in front of me or overhead. The big thing, guys, is making sure that those elbows rotate in. That's going to help keep that constant tension for those shoulder blades. The last exercise I like to do for my primer is some elbow rotations. We're going to start with the barbell on our back with a closed grip. I'm going to keep that barbell in place, and if you'll notice, I'm going to rotate my elbows out in front of me as high as I can get them. Now, when I'm doing this exercise, guys, make sure to maintain a nice neutral spine. Don't overextend at the rib cage and leaning back. Once I have finished working on these elbow rotations, I will move into just basically some wrist curls, where I'm going to leave the barbell behind me. I'm going to open up my hands and just use my fingertips to curl the weight back and forth into my hand. This is another way to stretch out the tricep, another way to stretch out the wrist, just getting it primed for some activation before we start moving some weight today.